Welcome to Nerdy Psychology, where your mind's not as messy as it seems. We break it down with a little curiosity and make sense of your thoughts and your themes. So be curious, stay kind, keep your mind nerdy.
Picture this. You just got the thing, the promotion, the acceptance letter, the contract, the degree, the opportunity you've been working towards for years, maybe even decades. And for about 45 seconds, you feel it, the joy, the relief, oh my goodness, I cannot believe this is actually happening. And then something shifts. A quiet voice, and it is always quiet, which is honestly the most sinister part. It starts talking. They made a mistake. They don't know yet, but they will. Everyone else actually belongs. You just got lucky. It's only a matter of time before they figure out you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. And suddenly, you're not celebrating. You're waiting to be found out, bracing for the moment someone pulls back the curtain and realizes they handed the keys to the entirely wrong person. And you tell yourself to shake it off, logically that you earned this. Your resume says so. Your track record says so. The people who choose you say so. But the voice, it does not care about logic. That voice has a name, and today we're going to look at it dead in the face, understand exactly where it comes from, what it's doing to you, and most importantly, how to quiet it. Let's go. Hey, welcome back to Nerdy Psychology, where we take the messy and complicated and endlessly fascinating experience of being human and make it a sciencey sense. I'm Dr. Angel, a licensed mental health practitioner, and I am particularly fired up about today's topic because I see this one constantly in my clinical work, in my research, and if I'm being completely honest, sometimes even in my own life. Imposter syndrome. We are going in. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am so glad the algorithm found you and brought you to this couch. Hit that subscribe button because we do this every week and you're gonna want to stick around. If you're a returning nerd, you already know what's up. Let's get into it. Here's why I wanted to do this episode. Imposter syndrome is one of those things that is wildly common and almost never talked about honestly. We mention it in passing. We see it on motivational graphics. We nod knowing someone brings it up, but we often don't sit with the reality of what it's actually doing to people. It makes high achieving people shrink. It keeps qualified people from raising their hand or applying for the role or asking for the raise, claiming the spaces they've earned. It turns accomplishment into anxiety, and it makes success feel like a trap instead of a reward. And here is the part that gets me. The people who experience imposter syndrome most intensely are often the most competent people in the room. I'm going to say that again. The people who feel the most like frauds are frequently the people with the most qualifications. And that's not an accident. That's psychology. And we're going to understand exactly why today. Let's start at the beginning. The term imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, as it was originally called, it was coined in 1978 by psychologists Pauline, Clance, and Suzanne Imes. And here is a detail I absolutely love. They first identified it while studying high-achieving women. Clance and Imes noticed something striking in their clinical work. Women who had objectively accomplished extraordinary things like advanced degrees and professional recognition and published work and leadership positions, were privately convinced they didn't deserve any of it, that they had somehow fooled everyone, that success was luck or timing or charm, anything except their actual competence. And they published a paper called The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women, and essentially named something that millions of people had been quietly experiencing, but they had no language for it. Now, critically, subsequent research made clear that imposter syndrome is absolutely not limited to women. Studies have found it across genders, cultures, industries, and career stages. A 2020 review published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine found out that up to 82% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. 82%. That's not a niche experience. That is almost everyone. So what exactly is it? Well, it's defined as an internal experience of intellectual phoniness, a persistent belief that, well, you're not as intelligent or capable or as qualified as others perceive you to be, and a fear that sooner or later people are going to find out. Notice that definition says internal experience, because here's the key. Imposter syndrome is not about your actual competence. It's about the gap between how competent you actually are and how competent you feel. And for people with imposter syndrome, that gap is enormous and almost always skewed in the wrong direction. Okay, let's make this real, because imposter syndrome does not always look like someone cowering in the corner, convinced they're a fraud. It's sneakier than that. It can look like over preparation, like you studied 3 times as much as anyone else because you're convinced everyone else just knows the things and you have to fake it. From the outside, you look incredibly diligent, but on the inside, you feel terrified. Or it can look like deflecting credit. Someone says, you did such an amazing job on that presentation. And you immediately say, oh, it was really a team effort. Or I just got lucky with timing. You can't hold the compliment. It feels dangerous to hold the compliment. Like agreeing with it would be a lie. Oh, it can look like procrastination, not laziness, fear. You put off starting the thing because if you don't finish it, no one can evaluate it. And if no one can evaluate it, no one can confirm your deepest fear, that you don't feel like you're good enough. It can look like overworking, the flip side of procrastination. You work twice as hard as everyone else, not because you love it, but because you believe you have to compensate for this deficit that you convinced you have, a deficit that you don't actually have. It can look like chronic self-doubt, even after success. You hit the goal, you get the result, and instead of updating your belief about yourself, I did it, I can do hard things, you file it under, got lucky this time, and wait for the next chance to prove yourself. It can look like silence, not speaking up in the meeting, even when you know the answer or the solution to the problem, because you don't want others to realize you don't belong there. Or not applying for the opportunity because you don't meet 100% of the qualifications. Even though research shows that men apply when they meet only about 60% of the qualifications, and women and underrepresented groups tend to wait until they meet nearly all of them. Does any of that land? Good, because now let's talk about why it happens. There are several intersecting psychological mechanisms at work in imposter syndrome. And I want to walk you through the main ones because, well, understanding the why is genuinely part of the cure. The Dunning-Kruger effect in reverse. You've probably heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, that phenomenon where people with low competence in a domain tend to overestimate their ability because they lack the knowledge to recognize their own gaps. What gets talked about less is the other side of that curve. As actual competence increases, something counterintuitive happens. People become more aware of what they don't know. The more you learn, the more you understand the complexity and the depth of a field, and the more aware you become of your own limitations within it. So genuine experts often feel less confident than people who know far less. They can see the edges of their own knowledge. Less competent people, they can't. And imposter syndrome, in part, is the tax that expertise pays. Here's a cognitive pattern that fuels imposter syndrome at every turn, and how we attribute our successes versus our failure. When people with imposter syndrome succeed, they attribute it to external factors, things like luck or timing or a generous evaluator, the stars aligning. When they fail, they attribute it to internal factors like I'm not smart enough, or I don't belong, or this confirms that I'm a fake or a phony. This is a deeply asymmetrical way of processing experience that makes it virtually impossible to build genuine confidence, because confidence is built on internalizing your success. If every win gets filed under lucky break, your self-concept never gets to update. Psychologists have identified something called the spotlight effect. Our tendency to overestimate how much other people are noticing us, evaluating us, and scrutinizing our performance. In reality, most people are far too preoccupied with their own experience to be carefully monitoring, well, yours. But to the imposter syndrome brain, you're always performing, someone's always watching, and they're always about to see through you. Layer on top of that social comparison theory developed by psychologist Leon Festinger, which describes our tendency to evaluate ourselves by comparing ourselves to others. In professional environments, we almost always compare our internal experience, full of doubt and confusion and uncertainty, to everyone else's external presentation that's polished and confident and seems certain. It's profoundly unfair comparison. We have full access to our own mess, and we only see others' highlight reels. So when imposter syndrome activates, the brain is essentially, it's processing a social threat. The amygdala, our threat detection center, flags the situations where we might be exposed or evaluated or rejected. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. And this is not a metaphor. This is documented neuroscience. In response, our prefrontal cortex, our rational reasoning brain, gets, partially hijacked, which is why you can know logically that you earned your seat and still feel like a fraud. Knowing and feeling are processed in two different parts of the brain. And when the threat response is activated, knowing doesn't always reach the feeling. And add this to the role of cortisol, that stress hormone, which rises under evaluation and social threat, further impairing clear thinking and amplifying anxious rumination. Your brain is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what it is evolved to do in social environments, where belonging meant survival. The problem is your nervous system cannot always tell the difference between, genuine threat and performance review. So who's most at risk? Research identifies several groups with, higher rates of imposter syndrome. First-generation professionals, people who are the first in their family to enter a particular career, educational level, or socioeconomic tier. That unfamiliarity of the environment, that's real. And the lack of a roadmap in the internal experience is not quite fitting, can be chronic. High achievers, especially perfectionists, because perfectionism and imposter syndrome are close cousins. Perfectionism sets an impossible standard, and imposter syndrome interprets any gap between that standard and reality, as evidence of being a fraud. People from underrepresented groups in any given environment, because when you are visibly the only one or one of a few, there is often a genuine external message, subtle and overt, that questions your belonging. Imposter syndrome does not emerge in a vacuum. Sometimes the environment is genuinely telling people they don't belong. And that is not psychology. That is a structural problem that needs to be named. New roles and transitions, starting a new job or getting a new promotion or entering a new field. Anytime the environment changes, the internal script can fire up again, even for people who have largely quieted it in other contexts. Okay. We need some tools for this. We need real ones. So here we go. Tool 1, build your evidence file and the brag document. So here's the core of the problem. With imposter syndrome, it is, running on selective evidence base. It collects every failure, every gap, every moment of uncertainty, and it ignores, minimizes, or externally attributes every success. So the first tool is about deliberately, intentionally correcting that evidence base. So what do? You create what I call the evidence file. Like you're a detective on a case. Some people call it the brag document, the win journal, or the credibility archive. What matters is that you start keeping a running record of things you've accomplished, big and small. Positive feedback you have received. Write it down verbatim. Don't paraphrase it into something smaller. Moments where you did the hard thing and it worked, or you got through it. Skills you've developed and demonstrated. Problems you have solved. Solutions you've found. Challenges you've navigated. And this is the critical step. When the imposter voice gets loud and you open the file, not to argue with the voice, not to fight it, but to offer your brain actual evidence to work with. This is not toxic positivity. This is cognitive behavioral practice, deliberately interrupting a maladaptive thought pattern with documented reality. Research by Timothy Wilson and Jonathan Schooler on self-narrative shows that the stories we tell about ourselves have enormous power over our behavior and self-concept. The evidence file is a tool for authoring a more accurate story. Keep it somewhere accessible. Add to it regularly. Read it before high-stakes moments. Read it when the voice gets loud. You've earned those entries. Let yourself have them. Tool 2, name it to tame it. Externalize that voice. We talk about this often. This one sounds almost too simple, but it's really not. Neuroscientist and psychiatrist Dan Siegel, whose work I mention in a lot of our episodes, coined the phrase, name it to tame it, to describe what happens when we put language to an emotional experience. Research shows that affect labeling, simply naming what you're feeling, reduces the activity in the amygdala and it increases the prefrontal cortex engagement. So when you name the emotion, you shift it from being inside of you to being a witness of it. And that shift changes everything. So here's how we could apply this to imposter syndrome. When the voice shows up, and it will, don't try to suppress it. Don't try to argue with it. Name it out loud or in writing. There's that imposter voice again. Imposter syndrome is showing up right now. I notice I'm having a thought that I didn't belong here. Notice the language. You're not saying I'm a fraud. You're saying I'm having the thought that I might be a fraud. There's a fundamentally different relationship to that experience. You can even give it a name if that helps you create distance. Some of my clients name the voice. They might call it Gerald or call it the committee or call it whatever makes it feel smaller and more separate from you. Because here's the truth. You're not the voice. You are the one who can hear it, observe it, and choose what to do with it. That observer, that witness is your actual self. Your actual self has receipts. Your evidence file has receipts. Tool 3, normalize it and share it. The power of disclosure. So here's the thing about imposter syndrome that, it keeps it alive. Secrecy. Because imposter syndrome tells you that you are the only one who feels this way and everyone else is fine. Everyone else knows what they're doing. You're alone and operating on borrowed time and borrowed confidence. And so people don't talk about it. They perform confidence while privately feeling terrified. And in performing confidence, they accidentally reinforce imposter syndrome because now you look like one of the people who has it all together. It's like this collective illusion maintained by collective silence. The tool is strategic disclosure, not indiscriminate vulnerability. Choose safe, trusted people in your professional or personal life, but intentional and honest conversation about the experiences you're having with self-doubt. And this is also why mentorship and community matter so much for higher achievers, not just for skill development, but because hearing, I felt that too, and I'm still here from someone you respect is genuinely therapeutic. Let me tell you about someone, we'll call her Dr. V. She had a PhD in publications, a position at an institution she dreamed about since grad school. She sat across from me in a session and said, with complete sincerity, I keep waiting for them to realize that they hired the wrong person. Well, we started building her evidence file. 3 pages, single space before she even got to grad school. We started naming the voice. Well, she called it the auditor because it showed up like this internal compliance check, scanning for disqualifying errors. And we started talking about it, first with me, and then carefully with a trusted colleague who immediately said, oh my gosh, I feel like that every single day. Over time, the auditor got quieter. It didn't disappear entirely. And I want to be honest with you about that because I think promising total silence is a disservice. But it did lose its authority. It became background noise instead of the loudest voice in the room. And one day she came in and said something I think about it a lot. She said, I think I've been confusing humility with fraudulence. Like I thought feeling uncertain means I didn't belong. But actually, uncertainty is just what it feels like to be someone who takes their work serious. Uncertainty is what it feels like for someone who takes their work seriously. You're not a fraud. You're a person who cares enough to question yourself. And that right there is a strength, not a symptom. I have to know, where does imposter syndrome show up for you? Is it at work? Is it in creative projects? Is it in your relationships? Is it when you get something you worked for really hard? And which one of these 3 tools are you going to try first? Drop it in the comments. Be as specific or as vague as you feel safe. But I want to hear from you because I promise you, whatever you share, someone else is going to read it and feel less alone. And that's the whole point here. You earned your seat. You belong in the room. The voice is lying. Until next time, be curious, stay kind, and keep your mind nerdy. That's a wrap. See you next week.
So be curious, stay kind.